Before I get started, I would shortly introduce myself. My name is Guillaume. I'm a French founder and designer of the design consultancy ENNOstudio. So my background is tech. I've been founding and failing startup now for about 10 years when I came to Berlin, back in the days. And I have a purely digital background, so to say. And now I am really focusing on design of product for, I would say like 6 to 7 years, working for big European companies, but also startups in Berlin. For the story, I had the luck to attend some architecture lesson classes back in Paris. I was attending some conferences and some classes at the School of Architecture of Paris Belleville. It didn't last long, but I actually learned a lot during that time. And one of my first topic of discussion was Le Corbusier. I don't know if you heard about this dude. He, beside having the same glasses as one of the speakers today, he actually he was kind of disrupting the world of architecture in a way. And I found it super interesting the way his vision, so to say. Maybe a bit of background story so you understand better the dude. He was a Swiss, later on French architect that mainly was active end of the 20s until the middle of the century, of the 50s. And he had great visions. And one of his main aim was to standardize, to universalize a little bit the world of architecture. So a pretty good idea in theory. So what he really wanted to do is unite two scaling system: the imperial British system from inches and foot, to measure distances, and the international metric system with centimeter and meter. So that already really makes sense. But on top of that, he combined this unit system with human feature. So basically, what for him really important was, as an architect, is to understand, how far goes your arm when you extend it in order to open the closet. When you sit on a chair, how many units is from your hips to the floor, to your feet, and all this kind of human proportion. He really including them in a modular. Modular is not only this hipster Berlin shop. Is actually a scale system. And it all started with a really, really nice idea, to make measurement and making scaling system more human friendly and really based on our needs. And on top of that, he put some really interesting measurement into it. He put also the golden ratio, the Fibonacci number. So it's really a complete system that did not really last, because at school we are still learning in centimeters and meters and millimeters and metric system, and not in modular. But these actually had quite an impact. And the way to come up with this new standard, with a new measurement system, was that he really based the whole measurement on one guy, a British Bobby, this policeman. I read somewhere that he had quite a passion for Conan Doyle and Sherlock Holmes. And for him, for Le Corbusier, his ideal man was this big policeman from 1 meter 83 tall. So that's how the whole system was based on one British policeman. And this modular became quite a success, I may say, because a few years later, the headquarters of the United Nations, in New York, was basically entirely built around the concept of the modular system. All the proportion were really based on these things, and that's what the first major project to work with this modular system. And since that time, he actually included spread all over the world. There's a reason why the door handle has a certain height, why some the window frame are that high, that's wide, and also how the kitchen unit was built for during quite a long time. So this modular system really had an impact quite worldwide, if I must say. And the problem, and I think you can already start to understand why I explain you about this system, is that many people were excluded from this ideal world, from these ideal proportions. For instance, kids, kids trying to grab a handle, super hard for them, right? Or even people on a wheelchair, for instance, they had to adapt the wheelchair on door frames, and actually should have been, the other way around. And to give you another example, until sadly, that was a harsh reality of the beginning of the century. Women were occupying most of the time the space, the kitchen, and a certain living space. It was wrong, obviously, but it was the reality at that time. But the problem is that in the 50s, when the kitchen were built for a 1.80 m tall man, this kitchen unit were actually not efficient at all. They were not using, not having enough place for the kids around. The height was totally wrong. It was not practical at all. It was only until the 60s and 70s that a group of female activists actually really started to fight against this male-dominated proportion. And nowadays, it's obviously changed because we involve much more the final users in building architecture. But that was a standard for quite a long time. Now you would tell me that was before, back in the days, beginning of the century was a shit show anyway. So they had other problems to deal with. And now, we are all tech people. We are all agile, flexible, adaptive. We think responsive. We try to include as many people as possible, which is true in theory. But I will show you 3 examples to illustrate a bit that the harsh reality of the online world is not that different than from the analog one. And most importantly, that unfortunately, history tends to repeat a bit itself. So I took a few examples a few days ago. AliExpress, which the biggest e-commerce platform, I think, in the world. And I run a tool for the people with visual impairments on it. So people that can't properly see rely on the site. So that's why they will use a voice recording software to actually listen to the content of the website. And basically what I heard was you are currently in the web area, a link, wish, menus, list, menus, product.html, header 1, categories, image, link, button, header 2, link. And it made me almost impossible for me to navigate this website without, looking at, without looking at the content. So, if I were, someone with visual impairment, I would be already excluded from the e-commerce experience from this website. Then another example, I went through the onboarding process for opening an account for a big German bank, and the first question that was asked to me when I had to fill in the forms was if I am a female, Frau, or a male, Herr. And let's say I would be a non-binary person, I already feel excluded from the onboarding process the very first minute I actually get into, I want to register for the account. Obviously, that's a mistake. Obviously, they overlooked that. We shouldn't exclude people because of the gender, but still, that's an exclusion, right? Last example, and then we are going to dig a bit more into the theory and about how to solve actually these problems. I read this article from Ashley on LinkedIn exactly 3 days ago, and she's working in the marketing department at Apple. She's a deaf user, so meaning that she speaks fluently sign language, and she shared her experience, and she said that 98% of the stock photos she's been stumbling across were actually not authentic. So basically, you have good-looking actors on the stock picture doing random signs, super approximate, and actually do not mean anything. And just imagine you are a deaf user, you stumble across a website that claim to be user-friendly. That's why they got all this material, right? And you see this imitation of sign language that are totally irrelevant and not authentic. I would feel super frustrated and even I would be mad at it. It's non-respectful. So that's a pretty short example, and now I'm going to show you some others also during the talk that really illustrate that no, the tech world is definitely not inclusive yet. And the reason for that is that actually the exact same reason that why people feel excluded from the modular system a few years ago, right? The way digital experiences are built are often still designed the same way that we look at many other analog creative projects. And I'm going to show you some of the reason that I believe is at the roots of this issue. please feel free to interrupt me, because I mean, I read a lot of different articles, but it's not the universal truth. I'm still actually pursuing this understanding and this goal of really mastering the topic. So I would be super happy to have a discussion at the end. But one of the reality is that most of the tech moguls and most of the tech people, I have to say, really belong to one homogeneous group of people. And this really group of people that are really similar in terms of features and abilities, really design products, work on the technologies of the future, and basically kind of not dictate but influence greatly, our tech features. And I know that always sounds super easy to shoot a dead corpse, but the reality is, like, our tech world is still dominated by white males, and I mean, I'm also a white dude speaking about this topic, and when you take Google as an example, and Google is known to make so much effort. They're super inclusive. I didn't take on purpose Amazon or Uber or any other company. I know that have some dodgy policy, but like Google is really trying to be more representative, trying to be super inclusive, and yet more than half of the employees there are white people, even though the company is basically everywhere in the world. I think there are like offices basically in every continent and every country, and like about 70% of people are male. So that's already kind of show the reality of behind the curtain. And when you combine that with a kind of a human natural reflex, which is we tend to design for ourselves, we tend to create for people that have similar to us. So like I don't know if you remember as a kid when you were drawing, so there's something you tend to draw people that were directly around you, based on your human features, based on your cultural references, and obviously you're not directly thinking about someone who is so far from your habits and from your own lifestyle. So it is kind of a natural human bias, but when you combine them with the reality of the people in a tech world, it's it can be a bit tricky. And I don't know if you're all here from the tech involved in the software development world, but there is when you plan features, when you plan, when you have these preliminary meetings, when you decide on a feature list, on the roadmap of your product development, you usually kind of prioritize a task, which is normal. You can do everything at the same time. You go firstly to what makes more sense, to what makes sense, and then what doesn't make sense, you put it to the backlog for later. And what's something I tend to hear quite a lot is like, it's an edge case, right? It's an edge case. We put it in a backlog like far down, and if we have enough complaint, at some point we may actually tackle the issue. But since it's not affecting the majority of users, why should we really tackle the issue right now? Why should we really be 100% accessible, or why should we really include a fully gender equal system when most of our genders are actually just binary? So I mean, the edge case is a bit the common excuse when you don't want to tackle a specific issue. And now you will tell me, like, why should we care? Well, first of all, because we're not assholes and we want to we care about other people, but also it has a lot of other benefits. And I will start a bit this argumentation by saying that we can all at some point of our life become edgy, become an edge case, because having a disability or having a difference or an inability is not something that is always permanent. So can also be temporary, can also be situational. I really happened to a friend of mine. He got extremely sick, and what happened is he was really fighting to regain weight, to be fully recover. And one day he jumped on his connected scale, that it actually track everything on your phone, and you received the notification, hey, congratulations, you lost weight again. And that's definitely not something that you wanted to receive as an information. And obviously it was temporary, because thankfully he recovered. But still, that's something that, illustrate that we can all become an edge case, or what we also call a stress case. And it also happened to me in Germany. I received during the COVID time a notification in German, and I fully didn't understand the sentence. Even though I do speak German, I didn't fully understand, the perfect sense. It was about the COVID alert. So, can also happen to anyone. And beside, an emotional and a personal benefits, it also can have a positive impact for companies. First of all, because businesses, if they are truly inclusive, they will satisfy more customers, so they will have a higher market share. So it's definitely better for the bottom line. But what I find much more interesting is when you try to design products in a truly inclusive way, what happens is that you are much more involved in the product development. You challenge everything, and it really triggers a new kind of innovation spirit within the team, because you look at your product another perspective, obviously, and then it forces you to be much more creative, to be much more resourceful while designing a product. So definitely designing or creating product in an inclusive way have a really cool impact also within the team, And well, something which is definitely unfortunate. I was myself involved in projects which were not fully accessible, fully inclusive. And what happened is that users really tend to complain and are much more virulent than normal users, because obviously they are excluded from the overall use, and they will really get involved. They really bash you in public, which I fully understand, by the way. So that's also a negative impact of not taking care of that, is you may have a negative impact, negative reviews on your product. So now that I scared you a little bit, let's try to come up with some answers, right? How can we make sure to have inclusive product for everyone? And before I get started with these tips, I would like just to give you my definition of inclusive design, because to be perfectly honest, I saw many vocabulary used out there. We speak about accessibility, mostly for people with vision impairment, about culturally inclusive, about gender equality. Basically, I would just wrap everything in one bag. With inclusive design, I mean making sure that your products, that your services are accessible and usable by as many people as possible, and ideally with all of them, and most importantly, at any time. So that's to solve a bit this situational and temporary edge case situation. So that's my naive and super optimistic vision of designing inclusively. So that's what I mean with inclusive design. Again, super happy to discuss this terminology. So the first learning, and I know that if there are some designers out there, they will definitely say yeah, okay, involve all the users. We know that, but that's the truth. If you want to make product inclusive, you have to make sure that all the users are involved in the process, because every design opportunity you do, the opportunity to include or exclude a potential user. And that's really, I don't want to do too much of theory here, but the basics of the design thinking mindset, empathize with your users, try to have all of them to look at their needs, to really build understanding and empathy, to really the widest range of users. And nowadays, everyone who is actually ready to download, your product and to the device is becoming, a potential customer. And how do you do that concretely? Well, in practical terms, first of all, I would advise you to do customer research. I think we all do when you create a product already. But instead of working with the typical personas, the personas are basically, this allocation of clustering the population into different groups. I don't know if you maybe study business or marketing, you may have heard about target group personas, and we tend to do it really traditionally. You have Margaret, she's living in Prenzlauer. She's 34, she rides her bike to go to work. She has a high income, and she's regularly on Bumble. Just like that's the typical person we know. And I would advise you here to work rather with scenarios, with user environment as well, to really fully embrace the reality of our world. So not having some characteristic, kind of a feature list, but really speaking about, how does she actually commute? How is her daily life actually looking at? And also something important is not only concentrating on her user needs, but also her user limitations, to make sure that it's not, we are not forgetting everything during the design process. And the last big advice on understanding users is to do testing. So that's also not something new for people in a tech world. But what I would really advise you is to extend your pool of users. So instead of having I don't know, the typical 6 or like 10 users you already ask to test your interface. For instance, try to have like every kind of users in your pool. And 2 little pieces of advice here. You go to speak to association. In Berlin, for instance, you have the Blindsverein, and they're super helpful. They will, sorry, in English, it's like the association for the people with blindness and visual impairment. So they actually here in every cities usually, and you can, we ask some question regarding the tools, regarding something, and they're super motivated to help, because they also want to challenge the status quo. So really go to this association, because usually they're super helpful. They will even do it for free, because they have like a bigger goal. I mean, if you have money to support them, that's even better. But yeah, try to extend your user pool, and don't concentrate only on the standard user. And maybe another advice, when the good weather is coming back, and then the COVID restrictions can to loosen up a little bit. What you could also do is what I already did in Stuttgart, super interesting. You invite people, you provide them with pizza, with beers, with whatever, and then you motivate people to get feedbacks to your product, and exchange, to have a nice evening together. And when you do that, you can make sure that you can really embrace the whole population, and you can have like every kind of profiles, and then you will get first-hand feedbacks of what's going on, what's going well, and what's not going well. Then super quick, thank God we live in a really automated world. So there's a lot of tools out there. I give you a few ideas. You can use screen readers, simulators. They are for Windows, Apple, and Google. That way you can always get the direct feedbacks of how your website or your app will sound like. Then you can work with a contrast checker that actually helps you, for people with visual impairment, to understand how the fonts and the colors will combine together. Super easy, super useful to do. And then you have accessibility checker. So kind of a audit platform that just goes through your whole product and tell you what's good, what's not good, what's to improve. And yeah, so quite a handy list. If you can screenshot that, that would definitely help you for your design development. And the guidelines, there are so many guidelines now out there. To be honest, I was blind for, I didn't even have a look at this topic for a long time. It took me only, I'm now extremely involved for 2 years, but before that, it's something that was unfortunately not really in my vision scope. So that's why I want to advocate for that and advise anyone else not to do the same mistake as I did, and just read of all the guidelines on the accessibility. The biggest one out there is WCAG, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's based on some legal framework, and also using the Paul principle. So basically what they say with the guidelines is that your content, your interface, should be perceivable by the user, so that the user should listen or see or even feel your interface one way or another. It should be operable, so you have to make sure that the user can interact with your product. Understandable, obviously, that you check what he's doing. And last but not least, robust, meaning that you have the possibility to interact with any kind of devices and assistive technology. So it's mostly the hardware perspective here. And these guys, the people behind the WCAG come up with 3 levels of standards: the A, AA, and AAA. AAA is extremely hard to reach, to be honest. The highest mark for accessibility, and it can also have an impact on your user interface, because you can't really play with fancy colors sometimes, or fancy gradients, because you won't fit the standard. So it's a bit up to every company to decide to go for which standards. But at the end of the day, if you have already A, it's already really good, because it's really hard already to get. And then on top of that, I'm not going to go too much into details, but there are a lot of guidelines from different operating systems. Some of them are like really techy, so you will have to browse it like a love novel, right? You have to be extremely fast. But there are some super interesting facts, such as when you design a product, or when you set up some layout, you have to make sure that the CTA are not too big or not too small. The distance between the elements is really good learning if you have interest in design or in even product development, to get familiarized with this topic. And yeah, my biggest latest advice is just to get started. It's not, creating inclusive design is not something you can do overnight. You are not going to start, don't put it next week in your planning and your spring planning, and it's done in 3 months. It's really something like a continuous process. You start now and you will have several months, but that's why you have to get started somewhere, right? And even if you don't have a accessibility score of like 90%, at least you get to the first step, and always include step by step, these improvements during your product development phase. So yeah, I think that's the biggest step, just to get started, read guidelines, get familiarized with the topic, and try to be proactive in this regard. Good. If there's no any question, I will tackle the latest chapter, in English, of my presentation, which is AI. And I do not want to bring the topic just because it's a fancy buzzword, but actually because I really believe it has an impact in the design world. I really believe that AI has a huge impact on design, because when you think of in terms of user experience, what you want is adapted really to the user behavior. And let's say, with machine learning, that you can really analyze your user patterns and behavior. If you realize that he's always reading one content, you will maybe try to highlight it. Maybe he overlooked a certain CTA, so you will change the color of the button to make sure that the user doesn't overlook it. So you have so much potential. You could really rebuild the whole user flow, whole architecture based on the data of your users, but also on every user that had a similar profile or a similar behavior. So I really think that the future will be including the job of designer will be more and more to deal with AI and with the tool out there. How to craft user interface that are really fitting behaviors. So that's one advantage. Another big one that I see is for user research and testing. I don't know if you did some user testing, but usually you have an Excel sheet, and you mark out the answer, and it's a super painful process, because you have to be super quick to look at the reaction of the user, and then you have another person at the same time asking the question. So it's quite a difficult process. And if you automatize everything, first of all, you don't miss anything. You can interpret the data in a better way. And what I think is even better is you could also have access to other kind of biometric data, for instance, or emotional data. You could have a camera that interprets at the same time that the user is like looking weirdly when he discovers a certain part of the screen. So it's registered, and we say at this specific point the user had a difficulty to use that. That's fucking beautiful, right? So I believe that in terms of user experience design, but also user research, it could have a huge positive impact. Yet, like everything, it's not there yet, right? We're still at the beginning. Our expectations are high, but there are still a few limitations. I'm going to few here again, show you some example why it's we are definitely not in an inclusive world. This beginning of the year, Twitter come up with a new cropping technology, because when you post on Twitter a really long picture, obviously it won't look good, because the tweet is horizontal. Some text, and then you want to have a picture. But if you have a really long vertical picture, obviously you don't want to display it entirely unless you are going to destroy the whole feed. So what you want to do, you want to crop it. But where to crop it? Right, only the button, only the middle, or not really easy. That's why they say, well, we're going to use automation, and so they ask the AI tool to basically decide where to crop the picture. And what happened is that basically the AI picks systematically white people over black people. Even so, you had Barack Obama, which is like freaking president of America. He was not picked over some other dudes just because they were white. So here there's obviously a bias, and I'm going to show you a bit the explanation behind. But it's not something that happened 10 years ago. It's something that happened this year, right? Another experiment that actually that was a bit older. It was 3 or 4 years ago. Amazon decided to automatize their recruiting process. They created a tool in order to analyze all the CVs, and they tried it and they tested it with as many women and men as possible, like as as much variety as possible. And what happened is that well, the software just didn't like women. They didn't hire any women at all. And I think you already get where I want to go with that. It's all based on that available data, and many what happened is like the AI is not to blame. It's just a tool amplifying our behaviors. So what happened is that if you are not careful, in a way you are feeding algorithm with data, you will end up doing the same mistake as we do today. So more than ever, what we have to do, we have to concentrate is to make sure that the data which is fed to the algorithm at the beginning of the process is really representative to the rest of the world. Because if I'm coming back to these two use case examples that I show you, probably with the cropping and the automated system, is that the developers behind, they actually mostly male, and they actually spoke in a way like fed the algorithm with certain vocabulary, with certain skills they were looking for, with their own CV, by the way, and that's why they were not representative to everyone, and that's what the exclusion process. So at the end, that's really why we have at some points of the process, try to include everyone, and but also we have to review the information. And I'm going to give you another example. That's maybe back from the analog world. I know you all know Kodak, right? The company Kodak, and that's documented, by the way. That's not just for the sake of the presentation. Kodak in the 50s were thinking about developing. They faced the issue that the camera was not properly picturing people with different skin color than white, right? Because they were solely concentrating for a long time on certain target group, and they basically said, we're not going to do anything for black people or like any kind of other skin colors, and because they are not representative for us, when we don't have that interest. That was in the 50s. And what happened is like we keep developing product, really based on a certain profile. And at the end of the day, now it's changing, thanks God. But like if you had like another skin color than the pure white that was used by the developer, with the product manufacturer in these places, then you had like really shitty photos, and then that actually is a fact. And the fact is they just took this decision in the 50s and kind of like took over of the generation, because all the data, all the technology of the thought were so made for one's use case, that kind of kept on being amplified. So that by the way is going to happen exactly as well for machine learning. Like AI is just amplifying, exacerbating our issues, and that's why we really have to act right now, and especially as designers, to make sure that the data available are clean, they're sensitive, they're inclusive, because that's, unless it's going to be a freaking nightmare in the future. So yeah, I haven't checked if there are any questions, but I would just like to do like a short wrap up, and give you some key takeaway. I know that in the tech world we use the idea of edge case quite efficiently, but I want us to move a little bit away from this idea that it's not relevant. I understand that company have to make choices, that they have to prioritize things. It's fully understandable. You can't do everything at once. We don't want that. But still, try incrementally and iteratively try to include, everyone, every use case to the backlog at some point. Because unless, it will happen with Kodak a few years ago, you're never going to tackle this specific user group, and you will always keep on this inequality and this exclusivity, so to say. Also, another advice is try to educate yourself. I know it's easy for me to say that, but I did the same mistake. It took me a long time to really understood that there was a big problem, and to get into look at the guidelines, read about there's a lot of interesting books out there. So really try to do a bit your homework. And also, we have, as tech people, our generation, to really take this responsibility to make sure that our design, our products are actually as inclusive as possible. We shouldn't think that, well, that's the management or that's the PO, the product owner, or like it has to be our role to say like, well, you know what, it's good, but did you think about this target group, or did you think about these people? That has to be, I believe, one of our responsibility. And yeah, I would like to finish on a one-line sentence. You know, inclusive design is a bit a buzzword right now. I mean, it's something that you may read on Medium, on a few articles. It's something trending, but hopefully, you know, not for long. I mean, hopefully, inclusive design will simply be called design in a few years, because design is just basically creating products or creating services for everyone. So yeah, let's just hope that inclusive design is just here for a limited time, and in a few years it will be just history. Well, thank you so much for your time. I spoke a lot. I was not interrupted. If you have any question, if you want to open a topic of conversation, I would be more than happy to debate with you.
All right, and thank you, Guillaume, for the lovely presentation.